Hello and welcome to episode 45 of The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's ongoing exploration of what makes this game so addictive. My name's Rod Murray, and alongside my colleague at Golf Australia magazine, John Huggan, we bring you these fortnightly discussions with people in the game who are both famous and otherwise, all with a goal of unearthing the myriad reasons golf means so much to so many. On this episode, we're leaning towards the famous when Huggy catches up with one of the game's most revered coaches, London-based Dennis Pugh. Dennis has worked across generations with players ranging from Colin Montgomerie to Francesco Molinari, and it's a position that gives him a unique perspective and insight into the game. Huggy joins us now. Huggy, because of timing issues, I'm only about halfway through your chat with Dennis. I'm finding him a terrifically entertaining speaker and thinker. You've known him for quite some time. How did you two first meet, and has he always been that way?
Yes, my connection with Dennis started through Greg Turner. Or actually, Dennis was the one who put me in touch with Greg Turner. I got in touch Dennis. My introduction to Dennis was actually when he was actually working alongside David Ledbetter. I was but way back in the day, a long time ago, more years than I care to mention. I was David Ledbetter's ghostwriter at Golf Digest in the States. And Dennis was working with David, so I got to know Dennis, and then I got to know Greg Turner, and I got to know Peter O'Malley, and on it went. So,
and now we have
Dennis and I
now we enjoy you down
way.
here. Now we enjoy you down here every year when our opens roll around.
Yes, exactly. There you go. Greg Turner, blame Greg Turner originally.
Blame Greg Turner. He's a really interesting thinker, Dennis, isn't he? And he's brutally honest about everything, which is probably partly what's so engaging, Huggy.
Yeah, I've always gotten on well with him. He and I joke back and forth. We've got very little in common politically, but when it comes to golf, we're very much on the same wavelength. And, when people listen to this, the full disclosure, he and I are really good friends. So it was actually slightly odd to talk to Dennis in an official capacity, if I can put it that way, because over the course of the pandemic thing, he and I have been talking every Monday morning for the last few months just to catch up and gossip about what's going on in golf. So it was more of the same, really, for this podcast. How
does that help either of your sanity, Huggy? Talking to each other every Monday morning can't be a good thing.
We're just looking for things to do, really.
Yeah.
And I've had limited human contact outside my immediate family and the occasional garage petrol pump attendant. So it's just a release. It's just a way of keeping up with what's going on, really.
Yeah. Now, as I said, because of timing issues, I haven't had a chance to listen to the whole thing. Give me a taste of some of the things that you cover with Dennis. I know you sort of speak about his early career, and very early on in the conversation, don't try to tune out people. The distance discussion, he's got a really interesting take on that, I think, over time, what's happened with distance. What else can we expect to hear from Dennis in this chat?
Well, he's got great stories, about Monty and Molinari. He's very interesting on Molinari and what Molinari had to do to make himself, at least for a brief period, 18 months to a couple of years, he was playing the best golf of anybody in the world. Molinari, when he won the Open and round about that time. So taking him from just a really good player who was making a very nice living for a long time on the European Tour and elsewhere to being, for a time there, a truly great player. It was kind of depressing, and Dennis shares my kind of misgivings about that. Was that the only way to do it was to find him 25 yards off the tee and get him to putt better, but mostly it was the distance thing. Everybody agrees that the ability to hit the ball further off the tee, you should get an advantage from that. Nobody's denying that, but it's kind of disproportionate now, and it's almost a little bit depressing that was what Molinari had to do was find 25 yards off the tee to make that jump.
Yeah,
that was really all there was to it. Yeah.
And like DeChambeau and a whole lot of others, full marks to Molinari for the work physically and commitment that it takes to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he might come back. We touch on it in the podcast, but Molinari's had a lot going on in his life. He's moved from London to Los Angeles, which is quite a jump.
Good Lord.
There's been a few physical issues along the way. He has issues with his back and a couple of other things. But so he's been very quiet for a while, but he's still young enough to, especially in the present environment. We're in the middle of what seems to be the year of the geezer on tour, given Mickelson's and Stuart Sink and Harrington and Westwood and Richard Bland wins on the European Tour. the over 45s are cleaning up at the moment in golf. So there's plenty of time for Francesco Molinari, especially with his work ethic, to reach, maybe not quite the heights that he did before, but something close to that.
One of the game's genuine good guys and a real bulldog competitor, which I think is probably the distance obviously is crucial in that sense, but you don't get there without the bulldog competitor side that he has as well. Last thing for me about Dennis, I really miss him on Twitter, Huggy. Did you get into any sort of discussion about that? He was always a controversial figure on Twitter, partly because he always gave his opinion and he was never shy about what that might be. Made him a great read, but I'm sure it caused him all sorts of trouble. Will we ever see Dennis back, do we think, on social media sharing his thoughts?
Well, you won't see Dennis, but he is back on Twitter. I know he is because I know what he calls himself. But it's he's nowhere to be found under the name Dennis Pugh. But he wasn't driven away by any golf things, really. It was mostly to do with his views on Brexit, the UK leaving the European community. So he was getting all kinds of grief on that. I mean, there's some subjects you're best to keep away from on Twitter, and that was one of them. And he decided to step back. But I kind of talked him into going back on. I said, well, I use it as a newspaper as much as anything else. Absolutely. Twitter, it's quite useful in that respect, and I think he's quite enjoying the anonymity that comes with having a different name.
Yeah, it's a real journos medium, Twitter, isn't it? It's like a news feed. It's like we used to have the radio on in the background. You'd hear the news headlines every 15 minutes. Twitter serves the same role on your computer. It just plays in the background there, and every now and then you go and check it to see what's going on. Well, there's a game for all the listeners, Huggy. See if you can figure out who Dennis Pugh is on Twitter. I'll be playing that from now on. I won't even cheat and get it from you after we finish this. Let's get on with the chat. Great to catch up with you, Huggy, and really looking forward to this chat with Dennis Pugh. Thanks again, mate.
My pleasure. Dennis Pugh, welcome to the Thing About Golf podcast. The first question I always ask on these podcasts is, what was the thing about golf that a wee guy from the Federal Republic of Essex found so attractive?
Well, firstly, hello, John. I knew you'd get an Essex jab in there at some point. I didn't expect it so quickly, but well done. I'll come back at you. In the wilds of Scotland up there, where the weather's always so wonderful, and yeah, at least you've got great golf courses, so I have to concede that.
Yeah, if only you knew, Dennis. I'm looking out the window here and I can barely see 50 yards.
Well, the thing about golf, I like the fact straight away. I started when I was about 14 years old, and like most kids around the London area, wanted to be a footballer, wanted to play at Wembley and do all those great things. But what I liked about golf is no one had to pick you. It's an individual sport, and you could practice on your own, play on your own. And whilst there's rules to the game, there's no rules on how you have to play the game. So you can see all different styles and ways of doing things, and that appealed to me. And as I grew older and got into coaching, I realized that the important thing about coaching the game was to make sure that everyone's had their own individual ways, and you try as a coach to make the individual better, not box him in a method of your own.
Well, let's get right to it. Were you any good at golf?
Sadly not as good at golf as I wanted to be. I was probably better at football, to be fair, but the game didn't love me as much as I loved it. I turned pro pretty quickly, 3 or 4 years into playing the game, and I got to a level where I was able to keep and a European Tour card for 3 years. So I kept playing for 3 seasons, but I was never able to make more money than I spent. And, if you're a professional, it's not your hobby, as I've said many times on Twitter in the past and got crucified for. But it wasn't a hobby for me. It had to be a way of making a living, and I couldn't do so. So it became pretty obvious that I had to find some other way of making a living, and coaching was something I found much easier than playing.
Yeah, well, before we get to the coaching part, I mean, there have to be some highlights. I mean, 3 years on the European Tour, I mean, it can't have all been misery and missing cuts.
No, it was mainly misery and making very little impact. I think when you say what were the highlights, it was making a cut, and it didn't... for me, there was pre-qualifying. There was... I could get through about 50% of the time. There was making the cuts. I would get through about 30% of the time, but there wasn't, finishing up in 50th. There wasn't even prize money in those days. You had to do better, and if you said as a professional, what did I enjoy winning? Well, not much. I won the East Anglian Young Professionals, and I won a mini tour event in Florida that had a pretty good field. The likes of, Paul Asing was playing in it. Right. So there was a decent field, but counting yourself over 2 days on a course in the middle of Central Florida isn't really highlights compared with Ryder Cups and Open Championships. So it was very much a minnow in the field of playing the game.
Well, what did you lack?
It was so simple. I lacked the ability to hit the ball far enough, which is why I, as a coach, say the 3 things you need to be a top tour pro is power, and then power. Because even in the days I was playing, there would never have been a player who could hit it less far than I could. I would always win the shortest hitter competition. And whilst I had the nerve to hold a few putts and a decent enough ability to get it up and down when it mattered, it wasn't enough to build a career on, which sort of put me, even 40 odd years ago, which it was 40 plus years ago, it put me into I didn't need stats to tell me you can't make a living just with your putter. You do not drive for show and putt for dough, because you don't hit it far enough and you don't get to putt for any dough at all worth having. So I beat the stats. I beat the years ago, and now it comes out that all the great statisticians prove that the long game sets you up, and the winner each week is usually the he or she that putts best of the best guys that hit it best that week.
Yeah, was that really as much true back then as it is now? I mean, I find that slightly hard to believe. I mean, I get the fact that, hitting the ball further is an advantage, as it should be. But was it that much that it could kill a career that you just couldn't hit it far enough back then?
Yeah, I think what it did in those days is you had to, Greg Norman was playing and Ian Woosnam, both fantastic drivers of the ball, and with a Persimmon club they could carry it 260 and pretty straight. And what people don't realise is with Persimmon and the spinny ball of the time, 260 was a great hit, and 210 or 220 in pure terms was the shortest hitter, i.e. me, could go. And so there was always been an advantage. And what happens nowadays is the big hitters are out there at 360 plus, if you go with DeChambeau and others, and someone who's called a short hitter is at 270. Well, that would have been long in the past, but now he's almost 100 yards behind, whereas I would have been 50 yards behind Norman or Woosnam. So, in my day, that it was my day, it was okay if you were a middle hitter, you could do well, but you couldn't ever do well as a short hitter. And nowadays it's to our detriment, and you and I have talked about it, that the game has gone almost, or will go almost exclusively to the guys who are the bombers. And if you're not naturally built strong, or you're not gifted with speed, you're not going to be able to be like basketball players that are under 6'5". It's going to be selected by your physique, not your skills, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Timmy, I mean, how did you find coaching then? I mean, my first connection with you, which seems like a very long time ago, was through David Ledbetter. Talk me into that and how things have gone since then.
Well, the big thing with the early days was that I wanted to be a player, and Phil Ritson was the guy that I was going to for advice, and David Ledbetter was his number 2 at the time at Disney World in Orlando. And it soon became clear that David was very passionate and very skilled at coaching, very different to the way people perceive him. He's got much more of an artistic bent to the way he does things. Yeah. And he's very good, and a great skill of communicating with people one-to-one, similar to the great John Jacobs and Bob Torrance, 2 other world-class coaches who people have an image of, but unless you had seen them coach. Unfortunately, John and Bob are not with us anymore, but you watch these guys coach and you realise it's much more about how they say things than what they say to the people. And so with those early days with David, I was learning a lot about how to work a video camera, which were brand new technologies. And because of that, people thought that was very, how shall we say, scientific, or very much a methodical way of doing things. And it was really more a way of showing people what they look like. This is what you're trying to do. This is what you are doing. doesn't look the same. So let's try and do it a bit more, and encouraging people to actually exaggerate their attempts at improving their swings. So that was pretty much where the early days come. It wasn't a bad time to discuss swing theories as well, because there was starting to be a whole new way of people swinging the golf club. Instead of trying to swish their arms as fast as possible, they started the early days of body movement. And so the dog wags the tail was David's great saying of the time. And yeah, it was the start of the industry of golf guru, golf coach, which some people think is great, and other people, as is the way of the world, think we ruin the world by trying to help people to get better, which is a strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was on Twitter yesterday, excuse me, and I came across this tweet by Rick Fair, who's a former PGA Tour player, and he pointed out, which is, I think everybody knows this, but nobody's really, I'm interested in your thoughts on it. You were part of a team, certainly before you kind of semi-retired, I know. But yep. Francesco Molinari, you were the swing coach, but there was a putting coach, there was a performance coach. You were part of a team. I mean, is that a good thing that's developed that way, or does Phil Kenyon know more about putting than you do? I mean, or significantly more? I mean, I think he does, but enough to make a difference to employ somebody specifically just for putting.
Yeah, this would not have happened. Let's move the clock back and then answer the question. Yeah. Without the impact of Arnold Palmer building the game and then Tiger Woods building the game, the money became a huge increasing factor in competition. So players were looking for their advantages. And in the early days, you would have your coach, and he would teach you to chip, or not teach, but help you chip and putt, and be your mental guide. Your turn-to companion, and also your swing coach, as it's called now. I started off being called a coach. I then became a swing coach, and then I became an advisor, because there's so many different departments that almost need pulling together. But when people think it's too many, until you realise the sort of money that's being paid for, and one shot advantage at the right time from any one of the guys is going to more than pay the bills.
Yeah, so you think it's a good thing?
Yes, it's a necessary thing, because there's no way that Phil Kenyon can learn as much about the swing as, say, Peter Cowan. Although there'll be people that say, well, Phil was a good player himself, and he was. And, I was a decent putter, I was. But it is about specialising. Yeah. And with all the information now that's in every department of the game, there's even a field that's opening up, a brand new field is actually learning course management. And I'm fascinated by the guys that are doing that. That is a real progress in the game. It's taking all the stats that have been available for 10 years or so and actually putting them into strategy for the players. And I know that Bryson DeChambeau and Will Salatas, many of the younger guys are actually looking at how best to play a golf course from the point of view of, it looks like they're attacking the course, but they're attacking the course mindful of where, if you aren't going to hit it, shall we say, into the very best spot, you certainly don't want to hit it into the very worst spot. And they're also looking at which areas or which avenues give you the most advantage to scoring. And I think the saying I love is you're playing golf with a shotgun. In other words, there's a blast pattern, and people have always said it's a rifle. Well, nobody I've ever seen in golf is so accurate that can call their shot making a rifle. It's the pattern of shots you hit, and then you decide from those patterns of shots where the best point on the golf course to go at the target, which sometimes is not the flag. Tiger Woods has been saying that throughout his career, but when you see these marvelous shots attacking the flag, and the commentator says he really attacked that flag, it's quite possible he attacked the target 3 or 4 yards right at the flag and pulled it a little bit, and it's finished close, and the world cheers, and he's seen as brave.
Yeah, I mean, it's all become, I'm an old fuddy-duddy enough to lament a little bit this, down the scientific road, if you like, and to the detriment of the artistic side of the game. But I'm consoled by the fact that, despite all of the above, the intangibles are still the ones that, to me, make the difference between good and really good and really good and great. I mean, am I right to think that? I mean, what are those intangibles if you can identify them?
Well, one of the great things that people hate to hear is the element of luck in golf, as if it's a bad thing. Well, as soon as you destroy luck in golf, you destroy the game as being something that's happening live in front of you, the variables, and you have to not only accept luck as part of the game, but deal with it emotionally, but also deal with it in the way you plan your way around the golf course. So if you're constantly walking on a cliff edge, you're going to occasionally fall off the cliff. If you keep in mind that you're trying to reduce the variable of luck, then you can only reduce it. It will never be eliminated, and never should be. So that's things that people don't like. And then the great Gary Player, whose record is superb, but sometimes been known to make some outlandish statements. And the one that is brilliant is the more I practice, the luckier I get. Well, clearly, it's not true, because you can't practice being lucky. And many times I will spin a coin. I can't practice making it go heads up. What he really meant is I'm sure the more I practice, the more I'm ready for when luck comes my way, or the more I can eliminate luck being a factor. But it's always going to be a factor. So, that's another cliche. And as you know, from knowing me over the years, my favorite thing in golf is the cliche bust. I just love going, well, that's wrong. Every shot that goes left, he came over the top. Well, over the top of what? We'll start by asking. And with what did he come over the top? And,
So all my years of trying to keep my head down have been wasted, have they?
Well, no, because you've always seen how bad your contact was with the ball, especially on those wedges, John. You see, I'm fighting back at you for those.
Yes. Well, you've seen my wedge play, so that's fair enough. Yeah.
But no, the cliche in golf is at the highest level, the coaches and the players and the caddies and the people around the game do know that it is a bit of BS. It's not there. But why I campaign this is that when people read it on Twitter or hear it on TV, the heart of the game, the players that make the game of golf, your golfer, going to use the expression, who it's his hobby, so therefore he's a hobby golfer, is going to actually believe this ball and actually try it themselves and think that, if I practice my putting more, I'll be putting for dough. And if I practice my driving, it's for show. This is, again, the cliche of cliches. I mentioned it already, and it's probably the one that really gets me fired up the most. But I don't like to see the hobby golfer being hurt by false or bad info. And when I did do Twitter, I wouldn't give tips, because if I threw a tip out willy-nilly, everyone that would read it would think, that's great, I'll try that. And it would help. It might not help, or it could seriously hurt. They were the three options. And the person can go down a rabbit hole of lost dreams in golf because they followed a path that wasn't right for them. So there's a lot of warnings that come when you search the internet for your latest drug tip, tip of your drug of choice in golfing tips. Terrible for you.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take you back a little bit, Dennis. We've kind of jumped ahead slightly, but I mean, what surprised you about that? You've been in contact pretty early on. I think through David Ledbetter, you probably came in contact with, absolute top players. I mean, Faldo and Nick Price and the rest of them. What surprised you about them? What sets them apart, do you think, from the rest?
Yeah,
the truly great player.
Yeah, well, it's the three things that come up is that to be great, you need to have talent. And, that's again where I could upset many people, defied talent. Well, it's obvious they find the game easier than you or I do. It's that's the talent. And they're also able to learn things quickly. And when people say work, they can really work hard. Well, no, it's talent work, but it's correct work. It's working to polish that talent rather than grind it into dust. And the great Bob Torrance, who I mentioned earlier, had the best saying ever: you polish a diamond, if you grind it away, you end up with diamond dust. And I think that stayed with me. I heard him say that 30 odd years ago, and it stayed with me because people think that just hitting balls, finding it in the dirt, another great cliche that isn't true. You lose it in the dirt as well, particularly if you dig big holes. You fall in your own divots and with your dreams. It's a hard thing to tell people, but you do need the talent and you do need the ability to work on the correct areas. And then when the time comes and it's your period of luck, which is really another way of saying opportunity, you've got to have the sheer, I hope I could use the word balls. You can have the balls, or let's try and find a posher word than that. You've got to have the inner fortitude to take advantage of that when it comes your way. And the great Henry Cotton, who I met once in his really late years, asked me about a player. We're talking about someone on TV together. I met him once. It was in the back of Wanstead Pro Shop watching TV, and on a black and white screen. And someone come up. He said, "What sort of player is he?" So he's a good player in the future. He'll be a good player. And he said one simple word: can he make 4 up the last when he needs to 4, or would he find a way to make 5? And I mean, that was someone who was a great champion and knew that sometimes it just boils down to you're playing the last, you need to make 4. Can you do it? And it's not done with a drive and a wedge flashing back from the ball, 2 great shots, and then 3 putting from 30 feet because the ball spun off the side of the pin or whatever. Sometimes it's a necky fade off the tee, a thin shot that runs up the green, and 2 putts from 50 feet holding the 4-footer. And that's a talent. That's a golfer. That's
I mean, it sort of. The light went on for me, I think, looking back. I mean, I had Nick Price on this podcast fairly recently, and I spent a lot of time around Lake Nona when I was ghosting David Ledbetter's stuff way back in the day at Golf Digest, and Nick Price would be there and Nick Faldo would be there a lot. And I made the point that I never watched Nick Faldo hit balls when Nick Price was there, because Nick Price hit the ball better than Nick Faldo. But at that time, Nick Faldo was number 1 in the world. Nick Price superseded that, but I always watch Nick Price, but there's more to it than that, isn't there?
There is, and both the Nicks were in their own ways. They were getting the max they could out of their talents for the game. But the restrictor for Nick was that he wasn't in the early days consistent enough, which is strange to say because he became Mr. Consistency. And then for Nick Price, it was the putter really wasn't working for him, and he learned to find a way to score with putting as well as ball hitting. I mean, he could shoot good scores without putting particularly well. When he started to hold a few putts, he got the number 1 spot in the world. And there's a good example of you do need to have a putter that works for you, but you do need to be a good hitter as well. And
I mean, I think I said this. I think I said this on the podcast when he was there. I mean, it's a simplistic analysis, but I mean, when I was watching Nick Price at first, I mean, he was the best ball striker in the game for a few years.
Yep.
Then he found a way to putt for about 5 years, so he made himself the best player in the world. And then he just went back to being the best ball striker again after that.
Yes,
it's very simplistic, but I think it's pretty accurate.
Well, the game of professional golf is littered by people who are beautiful ball strikers who just found a way to get it done on the greens and built themselves good careers. And incidentally, whilst I'm thinking of it, it's what's become over the last 10 years anyway is acceptable to hold the putter, move the putter. Anyway is acceptable except anchoring, which was acceptable for a while, and the R&A and the USGA decided it wasn't in the keeping with the game. But in my day, if you went cross-handed, you had the yips. People wouldn't be saying that's the best way to putt. They would go, "Oh, he's got some problems with his putter. Look, he's holding it cross-handed."
The acceptability of a variety of grips is fairly new, but you're right. I mean, if you did anything other than what looked orthodox back in the day, the people immediately thought, "Oh my goodness, he's got problems."
Yeah, and I remember reading somewhere that Tom Watson refused to do anything other than hold it in the conventional way.
That's right.
Use a conventional putter and take it on the chin, which admirable quality of sheer determination, but slightly tempered by the fact that if he had gone to another form of grip and stroke or putter, he might have he might have had more majors. You never know. But you'd be pretty happy if you're Tom Watson, though, wouldn't you, really?
Eight wasn't a bad return.
No, and he played the game quickly, which was which we'd like to see again. And he played it with an integrity that we'd like to see again. So,
yes, that's a subject that we'd best leave alone. I wanted to get into some of the people that you've coached over the years. I mean, there's a huge variety of people. I mean, people I know well from back in the day. I mean, let's run through, the Antipodean connection. You were worked with Frank Nobilo, Greg Turner, Peter O'Malley. They'd be the three highest profile, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but three very different people. But you were coaching all of them. I mean, run me through how you made that work.
Well, it was. We started with Greg Turner. Greg had a sterling career as an amateur golfer, and I think it was Oklahoma he went to as a university in America, and he was a top player. He turned pro and had a win immediately. I mean, within 6 months, I think he won in Sweden. And everyone, IMG were managing him. Everyone predicted a great future, but he got to a point where he couldn't find the fairway comfortably, missing it left or right, and his ball striking, shall we say, it's always everyone strikes a ball, so you're not called the ball striker, but his ball hitting wasn't in the bracket it needed to be. And I think I'd had some talent to work with over years, but when I saw his ability to compete, I thought, this is a man who all you've got to do is put him in position to win, and he will he is the ultimate find a way to win, find a way to make four when others would find a five and it worked out. And it was a question, if you could make Greg that good, you must be able to help me. So that was when he was the best advert a man ever had for coaching. He went from unable to hit the golf course to winning, which made me look good.
Yeah, I mean, I always likened your relationship with him to Padraig Harrington and Bob Torrance. I mean, Harrington went to Bob in the same, not quite as bad, I think, a state as Greg was in when he came to you, but the principle's the same in that Padraig had everything that you needed to have to be a great player and win big tournaments, except he couldn't hit the ball well enough.
Yeah,
and that was what Bob gave him, and it sounds like you did the same for Greg, because Greg, you're right, I mean, we both know him well. Greg's got everything. Greg's a winner. I mean, I've played bounce games with Greg and he wouldn't let me beat him. I mean, it's pathetic he's so competitive, but that's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah, I saw with Greg also that, during the time we were working together, it wasn't immediate. It took a long while to turn him around, 6 months or more. It was a lot of heartache. And during that, he had to go back to the tour school at La Manga. And I went with him and I saw the best golf shot from Greg I've ever seen. He was playing the par 5 and he'd hit it into a position almost in the lake, and he had to go round a palm tree and bend it about 60 yards in the air. Fortunately, it was a left to right, which he was a good exponent of. But he took it on, and if he'd missed that shot, he would have, I think it was in the fourth round, he would have missed the cut, or if it was, my memory fails me, it might have been in the last round, and he needed to get the card, but he hit a fantastic shot. I mean, just the quality of strike and the bend, but also the pressure of the situation. And he got the four that he needed. But people always talk about the pressure of winning and the pressure of trying to make a cut, but the pressure of trying to get your card is immense and certainly the biggest pressure. And he could handle that. He did brilliantly. So,
are we underestimating slightly just how bad he was? I mean, I've heard him tell this side of the story, and I think your first session with him, you took him away to a quiet range of the middle of nowhere at Wentworth, away from prying eyes, and he describes it as topping and shanking every second shot. And then he said a film crew with Nick Faldo showed up while he was there.
Right. Exactly right.
But how bad was it? I mean, are we giving him more credit than he deserves in a way? I mean, how bad? He describes it as horrific.
Well, it wasn't the best I've seen. That's putting it politely. But the rumours of how bad he made it sound actually just polished the legend of how great a job I must have done. So I'm not going to argue with him. But it was, and then of course the other New Zealand star was Frank Nobilo, and Frank and he played World Cups and stuff together, and Frank was over competing, and Well, I think Frank and I got along well because we loved to argue, both of us. And, we were arguing not always with each other about the establishment ideas and principles of the time around ball flight. And I was a rebel with a cause because I knew the PGA manuals were not teaching it correctly. Yeah. And so did Frank. So he found people like Frank and I who love to argue. Sometimes you're arguing with each other or you're arguing against others and you form a unit to argue against them. It was a pretty unpopular time when you were telling people the ball flight didn't work the way it was being coached. And basically what happened is that time moved on, and 15 years later, TrackMan and other launch monitors proved exactly what happens and how important where you hit it on the club face is to what happens to the flight of the ball as well, which was in our day, back in the day, it was a question of you listened for the quality of the strike before you made the analysis, because you knew it was an influence on what would happen to the ball. So yeah, with Frank, and Frank had a great golf swing. I mean, beautiful. It was classic rhythm, and there were not many positional changes needed, but the ability to basically hit the shot you wanted to hit, which was about understanding ball flight. And so that was with Frank and I, still meet up occasionally if I'm not in recent times because of COVID, and have a natter about golf. And we argue less now, which is a bit worrying.
Oh, dear. It's disappointing.
Yes, it really is. I mean, pretty much if you went out for a meal at those times with Greg Turner and Frank Nobilo, you weren't going to be bored by the conversation. There'd always be some point to have an argument about.
Yeah, I went to dinner a lot with Greg Turner and Thomas Gugler from Germany back in the day, because we were the only three people that we reckoned on the tour that were leaning slightly left of centre politically. So we didn't have anything in common with anybody else. And it's funny enough, Dennis, you were never invited. I don't know why.
Yes, I know. But I changed my mind as I got older. I realised that the politics of my youth was mainly based on the aspiration that if I got rich, I'd keep all my money. And it's not quite the... it never happened that I got rich enough to put funds away in places to avoid tax. But it did get to the point where I realised we're all living on the same planet. We better help each other out a little bit. And it may be tempered by the fact I ended up getting married to a tax judge as well. Which,
there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to talk about Peter O'Malley as well. I mean, I think
I knew you would.
You once described him to me as you reckoned that nobody in the history of golf has hit the ball in the middle of the club face more often than Pom's done. Is that still true?
Well, yes, because it'd be hard to imagine how somebody could. I never actually didn't get to see Ben Hogan. I'm sure that the stories about him would suggest he was a great hitter of the ball. But Pom could go for months on end. I think I've said somewhere along the line 6 months without missing the centre of the club face. And nobody in golf has missed more 15-footers for birdies than Pom. And Mike Clayton, another guy that I coached along the way, and a great guy and a great thinker out the game, said that when Pom beat Tiger Woods in the match play, the WGC match play, he said, well, today was a day when Tiger putted like Pom and Pom putted like Tiger. And the whole thing changed around, but it was only temporary. But when he putted well or decently, he was a heck of a player, because in his swing, he was probably the student I changed the most, even more than Greg, because he came out with a swing that was modelled on Greg Norman, wide, leggy, but Pom was, it's fair to say, not the same physique as Greg Norman. He was stocky, strong guy, but 5'8" or so, and relatively short arms, and wasn't going to succeed trying to hand-eye coordinate his way around a golf course. And he became the classic body move golfer. And
I mean, he's still ridiculous. I mean, I've caddied for him 2 or 3 times in tournaments, and it's mind-boggling how good he is still.
Well, it's also when you were out there having your meals with Greg and Thomas, or throwing Frank, you'd go out. I'd go out for a meal with Pom, because you couldn't find a nicer guy. He couldn't argue with you about anything. He also liked the odd glass of red, which I do as well. So nights with Pom were pretty chilled.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, Pom it might be the nicest guy on the planet, but when you're caddying for him, they're a slightly different side. I mean, Jason Duffner just last week at the PGA described golf pros as, psychopaths, I think was the word he used, which might be a bit strong. But even Pom, under the stresses and strains of competition, gets a bit agitated. I mean, there was a couple of times where he once said to me, "You're not walking in a straight line," as if that mattered. And there was another time I had to stop the clubs clinking. Don't stop them clinking.
Yes, I mean, yeah. The psychopath side of things is under all their skins. It's there with all of them because the game does that to you. Some of them hold it closer to the surface, so you might want to move on now to Monty.
Exactly, that was my segue. I was leading to you. You saw me coming there. You did. Yeah.
I could see when I've known you long enough. Yeah.
Anyway, he's the ultimate psychopath, I'm assuming. Put me right on that if I'm wrong.
Well, it's the thing about him, and we were even joking about Pom, it can drive you crazy, the game, is that it's such a desire to compete, Monty, that he would compete, like you said with Greg, he's competitive in anything. And what I found was that I was expecting a certain type of permanently angry person, but away from the golf course, so much fun that people can't imagine, these waspish sense of humour, and he's just the way he takes the mickey out of himself and his friendliness with people generally, and it then switches off when he puts, as he zips the glove onto his left hand, he does it in such an aggressive way. You think, right, now we've got the other Monty now. And I know that there was at least two, and I'm possibly thinking there were 3 or 4 more hidden there. But the guy on the golf course, he wasn't a nice Monty, but he couldn't be, the harder it was for him. If he tried to be nice on the golf course, he didn't play very well. He seriously had to get himself onto the brink. And sometimes all the dramas that were happening around him actually helped him to play better. He needed to be super intense to get super results. And he did.
Yeah, I mean, I knew him long before you did. I mean, I played a fair bit of golf with Monty, and I think I've said this before on here, but when he was an amateur, and I was in the same team with him at one point. But he was extraordinary. I mean, he went to, as I've said, maybe I've told this story before, but maybe not to you, that he went to America to college at the end of 1983, it would be, and he wasn't ranked in the top dozen amateurs in Scotland when he went there. And he came back sort of 9 months later, and I played a practice round with him before the amateur at Formby in 1984, which he got to the final later that week and lost to Alathabal. But it was, I've said this, I still shake my head at this. I mean, it was Philip Parkin, who was the holder of the amateur championship at the time, and Colin Montgomery played against Colin Dalgleish, future Walker Cup captain, and myself. And after about 5 or 6 holes, I turned to Colin Dalgleish and said, "Have you noticed anything?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "This guy's fantastic."
Yes.
And he was 23 years old or something at the time. I mean, it wasn't as if, or 21. It was late to have such a transformation. And by the end of that year, not only was he the best amateur in Scotland, he was the best amateur in the British Isles by a distance. I mean, he was clearly the best player. I mean, have you got any explanation for that?
Well, he loved to compete. So what he did is when he went to America, that's the ultimate in college. They don't fiddle around with technique too much. They don't do much else other than, get on the golf course, play and compete. And, that's his strength. He would find a way to do it. And for those, the golfers that are listening, I suppose they're almost exclusively going to be golfers, would learn something from the way Monty played the game, is he would look at where the ball wanted to go. Where do I need to hit this shot? And he would see the shot in his mind and the target, and then work back to how do I need to feel in my swing to hit this shot. And so you would watch Monty look at the target, see the shot he wanted to hit, which mainly was a fade, but he had other shots in the locker. But he would take a few practice swings, but as soon as he had the feel, he would step in and hit the shot. So people assumed Monty was one of the quickest players ever. But what he was at was between his last practice swing and getting the ball up in the air. he was extremely quick. And I asked him about it, and he said, once I've got the feel of what I want to do, I want to hit the shot before any doubts can creep in. So he'd sort of mastered the positivity needed to play the game, because and when he was chipping around the green, he might take 2 or 3 practice swings. He might take 1. If he only took 1, I knew he's got that, and it wouldn't be long before he would have hit the chip shot. So it's a good advice there. Is sometimes, if you play golf from the shot to the target, in other words, you're thinking too much about how you're going to hit the shot, you forget where.
Yeah.
And I would say you're better off thinking, well, where's it got to go? How am I going to do it? Rather than how am I going to do it? And then where's it going to go?
Monty had, certainly in my experience, there was certainly gaps in his golfing knowledge, if you like. I mean, was that a help or a hindrance? I mean, the example I always use, and this was at the K Club in Ireland, I've told you this story before, where he'd missed a cut unusually, and it was a Saturday morning, and he was over on the range hitting balls, which again was unusual. So I wandered over and was watching him for a bit, and he was trying to get his little fade back. He'd lost it temporarily, and he found it easier to hit the fade with a 3-iron than he did with a 9-iron or whatever it was.
Yes.
And he's saying, "Oh, that's it, I've got it back now." I said, and I of course commented, he said, "Well, it's obviously a lot easier to hit a fade with a 3-iron than with a 9-iron, Colin." "Well, why is that?" I said, "Well, the 9-iron creates backspin, which negates side spin, sort of spin 101. And he went, "Really? I had no idea." I mean, I found it astonishing. I mean, this was the best player in Europe at the time, certainly one of the best players in the world, and he had no idea about spin. So,
well, the reason that is that he did really want everything to be kept as simple as possible.
Yeah.
And what would happen with Monty on a warm-up on a range was that he would hit his first shots, and he was to start with a sand wedge, but he didn't chip. He'd make a fairly full swing, but it wouldn't be until he'd made about 20 or 30 practice swings before he hit his first ball, both to loosen himself up, but also to create feel of what he was going to do. Nobody took longer to hit their first ball on a range than Monty, but nobody would rarely...
He had to finish his sausage sandwich first, obviously.
Oh, no, that's nasty, but true. But there we go. Well, that was also because he enjoyed, and it'd be no secret that he enjoyed his breakfast. That would be an important part of the day, because it put him, again, in a good mood to perform. So sausage sandwich... the first shot flushed. Now, the good thing was, if he didn't, the bad thing was, in one sense, good or bad, he didn't hit a good shot, he would just assume that was something, I didn't quite catch that one. And his next one would be hit quite quickly, would usually be a good one, and it would diminish he didn't over-theorize why he didn't hit a good one. And then people say, what happens if he hit 3 in a row? Well, I never saw him do that. It was that, he'd missed 1, but not 2. So it was move on to the next club. And
well, the challenge for you in the midst of all this, though, Dennis, I mean, we're joking back a little bit back and forth, but the challenge for you, I mean, how do you teach somebody like that? How do you make a difference technically to Monty? I mean, his swing, certainly to the layman's eye like mine, didn't change that much, but you've obviously made a difference to him. I mean, how did you go about that?
Well, the thing is that it was about trying to reinforce with him. You didn't really teach him. It was more reinforcing his mind what he did well. So exaggerate in the swings, the movements, the way, going into golf technique, but he had 5 key points. He had to get his hands comfortable on the club. He had to get his ball and alignment position ready to go. He liked to create a good feel of width in the takeaway. And the very famous complete the backswing, which people have made jokes about. He only played well when he completed the backswing. Then the feeling that there was no hit but a full finish, so that he would swing gracefully from the top of the swing through to a very, very characteristic finish. So there were 5 points: grip, set up, takeaway, complete the backswing, and swing through the shot. And really, it was that simple. Just remind him on one of those points. And actually, Saturday of the Open at St Andrews that Tiger Woods went on to win and Monty was in position, he said to me, "This is where you earn your money today, because I'm hitting it great. I want you to remember what it looks like, and when in the future I stop doing it, tell me what it looks like today." Now, that's how simple it was, but that was a great sign of how confident he was going into round 3 at St Andrews and chasing Tiger Woods. it was easy to see that he was a fragile player mentally at times, but it was less easy to see what I saw, that he was extremely strong mentally at times as well.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, everybody points at that, Winged Foot 06 was the one that he maybe should have won, but my mind always goes back to Congressional in '97. I thought that was the best I ever saw him play, and he should have won that week. He was the best player that week. And the other extraordinary thing about that was that I bumped into him on the Sunday before he went to play the final round, and he asked me where the range was. He'd never been to the range all week, and here he was leading the US Open. But that in my mind, that was the best he played. I mean, what's your view on that?
Congressional was a really good week of Monty at his finest. I think he'd won the week before.
It's Slately Hall, that's right, yeah.
That's on the flight over, I flew with him, and he said, "I got a good feeling about this week, and tomorrow we're going to play 9 holes." And he always used to call it "we," as if I was going to be involved. And I was rather hoping he didn't want me to hit any balls, because it wasn't a "we" on the golf course, it was a him. But he did play 9 holes on Tuesday, 9 holes on Wednesday, and got to the first day and had no idea where the range is. So it's not actually a false story there. It's absolutely true. He was teed off at 7 o'clock and finished at 9 o'clock, and would go back to a shopping mall, go and watch a film, just do anything just to, relax himself before the start. And it was a great week, and it was ruined on the second day. There was a rain delay, and then he had to go out and play 7 or 8 holes. And some of the spectators were less than kind to him, shall we say. And he got into a little bit of a shouting match, as happens, and 2 or 3 shots went there that would have been quite useful on Sunday when he was trying to play. And don't forget, Ernie wasn't exactly
no.
off either. Great player, Eddie Els. 2 great players playing great golf, and it was a strong finish.
Yeah, I mean, that Friday afternoon, I remember that. I mean, to cast too many aspersions on Alistair MacLean, who still does a great job, for Monty on the bag. But if I'd been caddying for Monty that afternoon, it would have been, "Monty, get yourself up the fairway, I'll sort this out."
Yes.
And I would have been the one to get involved with, if anybody did, with the spectators. Yeah. It should never have been Monty.
No, but it's 2 points there. If pretty hard to stop Monty in full flow.
Yeah.
The other point is that, and this is actually a true story. On the Saturday morning, I hadn't seen him that night, but Saturday morning, I mentioned the incident on the 16th tee where he basically went nose to nose with a guy that was looked like he'd come out the U.S. Marines. Not exactly a guy to. And at which point, Colin, did you realise you were about to lose the battle? He said, "I actually did think about it," as I just walked away from that one, and Alistair maybe have made a more imposing figure. I wouldn't want to see Alistair when he was upset, but he did so many good things for Colin over the year. Yeah.
And just that one incident, I think he should have stepped in.
Fair comment. The other one would have been, Alistair was in the middle of the fairway at Winged Foot, and if only the pair of them had said, "Let's go and hit. You're ready. Let's hit." Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there was a kerfuffle happening over in the left rough, and there was some ruling going on. And in the end, when it was his turn to hit, indecision, worst shot probably he's ever hit in a closing important shot, and it wasn't to be. But that wasn't really anything other than that he made a bad swing on the 72nd hole because he stood around for too long and thought about the consequences. Such an easy shot for him. Take a 6-iron and hit it, and left of the flag, let it fade in, and then go and see what the kerfuffle is over there with the ruling. I think it was VJ getting the ruling. But, these are the things that happen in golf. And quite frankly, Monty had 6 times he could have won a major. And 5 of them, someone did something fantastic to beat him. And one time he beat himself.
I mean, I always think my mind always goes to that he lost a playoff to Elkington at Riviera, the PGA was 1995, I think it was.
Yep.
And this is so unfair. I mean, he ties with Elkington. They go out in the playoff. Monty hits a better drive. Monty hits a better second shot. And Elkington holds it across this green that was, the ball bounced and bumped and hopped around and went in from about 35 feet, and then Monty misses from much closer. And the first question he gets asked is, what went wrong? Come on.
I tell you what went right. Elkington wrote a 3 down that was the perfect 3, no matter how it looked in the doing. It was the finish of that tournament.
How much do you lament the fact that Monty never won one? I mean, there's yet another cliche, which I'm going to throw at you, is that, in golf, not every great player has won a major, but not every player who's won a major is great, but every great player has won a major. Where does that leave Monty in the...
Well, you have to be pretty great, and I'll use the word great, to win 8 Fardon trophies, to be the dominant player in Europe during a period where there were great players playing. We're not talking about, a lot of the American commentators of the time. Who did he play against? Well, he was playing against a time when Sandy Lyle, Nick Faldo, Olajuwon, Woosnam, Seve, Langer. I mean, Norman was playing on the tour when he first started out. These are proper players. And, I don't like that idea that you if you win a major, you're a great player. No, you had a great week. And take nothing away from the so-called one-win wonders. They won. They did what was required that week, and full praise to them. And I think that you can overplay the importance of a major, but it is important. So you can't walk away from it. And but last thoughts on Colin is that would you rather have his career than someone perhaps like Todd Hamilton's career? And I'm not picking unfairly. It just comes to mind that Todd Hamilton has the claret jug on his resume, and he had a great week to do it, and he won it brilliantly.
Yeah. Before we leave Monty, just one last bit on it. Why do you think he was so good in the Ryder Cup? I mean, the Ryder Cup at the Belfry in 2002, I think that again would rival Congressional for me in how well he played. I mean, he was almost unbeatable that week. I mean, fantastic performance.
Yep.
And he always putted or seemed to putt better in Ryder Cup. Was that simply because he wasn't worried about the one back, or was it that simple? I mean, you would know better than most, I think.
Well, the two things that come to mind is that the competition was very focused. He's playing either one other person or two with a partner, so you actually know exactly what you have to do. The simplicity of the putting is not that he wouldn't have to worry about the one back, because it was about this is to win the hole. It was the absolute definition of this moment. I've got to do this, and that's what Monty was extremely good at. When he knew exactly what he had to do, his task, and 90% of the time he was up to it. Not always, no one ever is, but he was able to demand and get the best out of himself in these Ryder Cup situations when many would be, less inclined to do so and be thinking of the consequences of failure. And going back to that putting, it's actually proven that you don't hold more putts if you hit them harder. You don't. You just don't. But you don't hold any if you leave them short either. Yeah. So, but if you're slamming your putt 6 foot putt pass and say, well, at least I gave it a go as your partner in the Sunday 4-ball, you're not really giving it a go. You're not don't leave it short is always a lovely one to tell someone. How about just roll it up to the hole and let gravity take it in, and more putts have been holed because the player had the right pace, but in his mind the wrong line. But it turned out to be the right line, and it fell in the hole. Yeah. Then the idea, I'm going to really go for this one. And,
Anyway, when you take you back to the very last thing on Monty is the range in 2002 at the Belfry when he hauls the guy out of the crowd to have a go, as he put it. What was going through your mind at that point? What did that tell you about where Monty was mentally?
Well, so many times I've talked about this story, but Monty was right on it mentally because he knew that the cameras would be on him, and he knew the first match out, which he wanted, and Scott Hoke practiced putting and then went to the range, and Monty went to the range and then practiced putting. So he would be the only person. And though the numbers varied from 5,000 to 10,000 people watching, Sky cameras on him. And this guy came out, and I could see that it was not going to end well, because he was still finishing his bacon bap, and the condiments were falling over his hands. In other words, he's got tomato ketchup all over him. It's Monty's sandwich, and he has these 3 goes and the banter with the crowd. But my only thought was, how are we going to get this grip clean? And there was a bucket of water there, and if you look at that, ever see that again on Sky, it's only replayed about 10,000 times. But the point that I always laugh at is myself trying to get the grip clean without putting tomato ketchup on the towel that he's got to use on the golf course. So it was sometimes coaching is not just where your hands are in the backswing.
but it was a good thing that he did that then.
Oh, yeah, massive. Imagine how you'll be if you're an American in the locker room and you're seeing Monty, who they're used to seeing the, shall we say, more petulant than easygoing, being the easygoing Monty and scaring them somewhat, because they knew how well he could perform. And he was nervous. He told me on the putting green before he went out that he was nervous, but he often played really well when he was nervous, which was a classic Monty, self-pumping up, getting himself ready to go.
He was fantastic that week. He really was. I mean, that's that and Congressional are the 2 best I think I've ever seen from him.
They were times when I look back on and I really enjoy the memories. So I have no problem talking about it with you. They're good memories.
Mm-hmm. Even if he did fire you 19 times.
I think it was 18.
It was 18, sorry.
It may have been 19. That wasn't always the happiest one, but we ended up in good shape. We're still good pals and can have a joke together. And he gets to the Wisley as he's president of the Wisley, and I'm vice president.
Right.
It's a pretty good honour for us both to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get to speaking of majors in a slightly happier sense. I mean, Francesco Molinari, who you've coached to a major championship. I've heard it said that, and you've probably heard me say this again, that he was, people have said, I don't think I've ever said this, but people have, that he was Pom with a putter, because they basically, they're the same shape, the 2 of them, pretty much exactly. What were you able to do for him, and what made the difference? Because he was a good player for a long time before he was the best player in the world for about 18 months, a couple of years ago. Yeah,
it's an interesting journey, and has been continues to be an interesting journey. But it started out in 2003 or 4. I can't remember the exact date, but I remember the session. And Eduardo, his brother, had already come over to have a session with me at the Wisley, and then obviously told his brother that I may be worth coming over to see it. He came over. Very different characters, the two brothers, and interesting comparisons in the way they see the game. But Eduardo was more like a Greg Turner insofar, just give me a golf swing that get a job done. And Francesco was more like Pom. In other words, let's perfect this swing so that it will be reliable. Neither of them scared to practice. I would say Francesco practiced more intelligently without being rude to Eduardo. Eduardo would hit too many balls. He would over-practice. Francesco, always from the beginning, would practice less, but with a little bit more intensity. And then, as you say, he went through the professional career, and he got to probably 216 and had made many millions, been inside the top 50, 60 in the world, outside, inside, gets into majors, maybe here and there, doing some great performances. He won a WGC. So we're not talking of a chopper, but we're talking of someone who one day sat down with me and said, this isn't enough. And we had a breakfast meeting at the Wisley, again, where we're both based. And he said, no, what do I have to do to be the best I can be? And my point was, you need to find 20, 30 yards off the tee, and you've got to putt better. And your practice needs to be more focused, even more focused. And he was a pretty focused practicer. But because he was so good as a hitter, he sometimes didn't really practice for what he would do in the tournament. So once that decision was made, and it was an extremely brave, because he's still a relatively young man at that point. He's in his mid-30s, say 34, 35, and he's turning his back on another 20 million that he probably would have won to make a swing change that can break his career. And We've seen that happen so many times, but he deemed it necessary. And it was then the point about the team was brought together. Much has been made of his improved putting, and rightly so. Phil Kenyon takes full credit for that. Dave Aldred, of course, with the mean and nasty practice sessions, where every session with Dave is mean and nasty because he's trying to toughen him up for the performance that's going to happen on the golf course. And then there was a great input because he has to do the physical training, and Rob Goldup, his trainer, and more so his mentor on all things to do with health. He just pushed him hard in the gym and made him stronger. So at that time, I was able to look at more how the swing technique could be established to get more power. And that's the squad that went to Muirfield, to Carnoustie, and did the job at Carnoustie. The reason I mentioned Muirfield first was that he did have a time when he played with Phil Mickelson in one of the last groups at Muirfield, which was his first exposure to the Open Championship pressure on the last day. I think he finished 10th. Phil won it.
Right.
And that prepared him as well to play at Carnoustie. And at Carnoustie, he was in a form where he was, I think, the best player in the world on statistics. And it continued for a period of, maybe it was 18 months, where he was amassing the most points on the world rankings. And then winning at Carnoustie in the company of Tiger Woods and not really struggling at all with any of the demons of trying to win. It was a fantastic performance, which went on to the Ryder Cup, where he was 5 out of 5 with his great pal Tommy Fleetwood, and then going to win Bay Hill and the Masters not winning. People say that was the turning point. It was in one sense, but he started to have some problems with his technique, where trying to hit the ball so hard had introduced other things. So at that point, during the summer, he wasn't really on his game. He was suffering from injuries, and a little bit of a letdown from not winning the Masters has to be factored in, although we tried not to. And by the end of 2019, it was time to start brought on board James Ridyard, who's a specialist in the data feeding, and the practice become more data driven, and was starting to show some good signs until COVID appeared. And then for Francesco, it was a very difficult time. He was literally housebound in London and could see that his family, very important to him, wife and 2 lovely children. Obviously, for him, that's very important. And he made the decision that the way the world was looking, that he needed to get out and move to the west coast of America, which is a huge change, disruption in anyone's life. But someone who then has to go away and leave the family, it is very, very difficult for him to do, because he really does have a feeling that he should be there, and rightly so. He should be there for the family. But it hasn't helped immediately the golf, and people would say, well, he must still be swinging badly or whatever. No, he's in good shape. He's had to withdraw this week. He had some health issues with his lower back, but he's ready to go again. It's just going to take a little more time to get him settled to go again. And it's very important that people realize that these golfers have lives away from the golf course, and they've got to live them as well, however they choose. And I'm pretty confident that things will come again.
Where did you find him the 20-odd yards or whatever it was to make the difference?
Yeah, it's going to sound very, very obvious. I hit it harder. Now, how you're going to hit it harder is you've got to hit it harder using the body movements. Otherwise, you end up just swishing harder. There is no power really to be gained just by swishing, but there is some power in swish. And for those that are wondering what's swish, it's what you do with your arms as you swish a club through, and it makes that lovely swish noise. Well, that's okay, but behind the arms is your body, and that's got to contribute as well. And since we're mentioning people that were influential in this, everyone, Lee Cox, who's the Joe Miller's coach, would know that Joe's a power hitter, won the World Championship. And I spent some time chatting with Lee about how to get power, how important was power in the swing and where to look for it. And, he was informing me. But I didn't want to get Francesco just hitting it like a power hitter, because those boys just need to get 1 in 6 into a fairway.
Yeah.
Definitely, that's not good for tour play. So there was a lot of work, and it was an interesting work because we would do an hour session, 20 minutes intense hitting, 20 minutes chipping and putting, 20 minutes intense hitting. And when I say intense, it was as much power. I mean, it was in January, and okay, we were indoors in the performance centre at the Wisley, but he was lathering up with sweat on a day that would have been almost freezing because he was doing it like an athlete.
And I mean, I get the world that he lives in. I mean, I get completely that was the way to go to improvement. But I do find it slightly disappointing that we talked about the distance advantage, and you should get an advantage from being able to hit it further than the other guy. But in my mind, it's disproportionate these days. I mean, where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I have no doubt that you're right, but also have no doubt that it wasn't a debating competition.
No, not at all. No, I don't mean to say that.
Yeah, no, but as a coach, you have to go, well, that's needed. Yeah. To be competitive, he doesn't need to be as long as DJ. He doesn't need to be as long as Brooks or Tiger or Prime or whatever. But he needs to be long enough to compete. So if he's hitting 9-iron and they're hitting wedges in, that's okay, 8-iron, 9-iron. And when he played and won at Wentworth, the PGA, he was paired with Rory. And that was a test day because, Wentworth is a course where hitting it out there is important. And Rory still hit it past him, but he was close enough to, a hole like 13 round the corner there, Rory might be hitting 8-iron and Francesco 6 or 7-iron. In the past, a hole like that, it could be hitting from Rory hitting 7-iron in. Francesco might have been hitting a 4-iron or a hybrid in, so it's a lot harder to score the further you are from the hole.
I mean, I get that completely. I just think that the way it's gone, that the advantage that you get from distance is now is out of whack with how it, in my mind, it should be. And again, I plead guilty to being the old fuddy-duddy in this, but the advantage is now so huge that you're never going to get a Luke Donald being number 1 in the world again. And to me, that's a sadness.
I can't disagree, but as I said, I personally feel that the horse has bolted now, and whilst we'd all like to see some form of correction, the inevitability of 8,000-yard golf courses for majors and all the bad things that we know, but it's a question of if you want to fix it, I wouldn't start from here. The horse has bolted. It's certainly not a better game for everyone to play. Some would say it's a much better game to watch. And, the fans that get at the tournament, they love the long ball. What Bryson has done with that tee shot at 6 at Bay Hill.
That was entertaining. I'll give him that, yeah.
That's entertaining. Is it golf as we'd like it to be played? Probably not. But is it the future of golf? Probably so. And when the world has 20 Bryson DeChambeau, the golf world, playing, which will happen in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be, okay, so it's just a bomber. Who's the best bomber this week? Who can hit the drive out far, wedges it up and holds a putt? And perhaps the crowds will love it. I don't. Not everyone who watches golf is watching it for the finer points of the game that you, me, and everyone else who's grown up in the game love. Some of them just want to see, get in the hole. Either
mashed potatoes, yes.
And they have fun as well. They do. They go out there and they're out there with a beer in each hand, which is adding to their fun, and they're having a good time. And perhaps I would be that guy if I wasn't in the game. I'd be the guy with 2 beers and having a yell at the players because it's a fun way of relaxing for them.
I do wonder though, Dennis, where they're going to play 10 years from now.
On 2 golf courses, they start to join them up. Like they do at St Andrews. Yeah. You have to build a golf course to help you play the course you've got. And let's be fair. I mean, I haven't played with you for a long while, but my game is certainly not overpowering a course. I'm quite happy at 6-4, golf course of 6-4, but at 66, I do hit the ball too far for. If you compare it with when I was 26, I'm longer now. Yeah. Can't be many. I don't think Usain Bolt's going to run faster at 66 than he did at 26. I don't see people high jumping more.
Yeah, I keep going back to this. I've said this a million times and probably on here too many times, but what intrigues me is that golf's the only sport that has messed around with the venues to suit the equipment rather than fix the equipment to suit the venues.
Yeah, well,
that intrigues me that's the way it's gone.
Yeah, baseball being the obvious example where the
javelin,
the pros use wood.
Tennis, they slowed
the javelin.
Ball. Yeah,
absolutely. So there's more than one sport, isn't there? And but can it be done? Well, is there a will for it to be done? Is it too expensive to do? And I mean, in lawsuits, when the lawyers get involved, it's a easy appearing solution, but like most things around golf, they're not as simple when you try to implement them. Yeah, that's my comment on that.
Anyway, as they say when you're hosting something like this, moving right along.
Yes, that's right. You have to do that.
Let's talk about your broadcasting career, if I can use that. You had 20 years at least, I think, on Sky.
21. Yeah.
How much did you enjoy that? Obviously, you must have done it to stick around as long as you did, and you must have been pretty good at it. But for them to keep you that long. But what did you learn? What were the good points of the broadcasting that helped you as a teacher, do you think?
But it's about communication. That you hopefully the skill of coaching comes across on TV is that you can communicate something that's quite complex, make it fairly simple and somewhat entertaining. And certainly at Sky, David Livingstone was the on-air, what they call talent, the guy that introduces the show and brings it forward. And being able to join David, who became a really good friend, and he was a great help, and he would explain things and let me know how it worked. And he was very kind in the early days. And it was a different experience, when with other great guys that helped out. Andrew Castle, I did a lot of work with Andrew, moving through, and then Di Doherty, Di Stewart as she was before she married Nick, and then Sarah and old pals like Rob Lee, who I'd played golf with. So, but it's a lot more professional to look that casual. It really isn't as easy as people would. Yeah, would think.
You're dead right. I mean, the couple of times or 2 or 3 times I've been on these things, and the host guy, the David Livingstone guy, if you can call him that, or he or she. I mean, it's unbelievably difficult. I mean, I came away with a whole new appreciation of how good these people are.
Well, you've got to realise that when Sarah's standing there, introducing the show, setting it up, she's had one rehearsal because of the time problems that it's all under. At best, and sometimes no rehearsal. She's got an earpiece with 2 separate voices coming at her. And she's got to stay calm and unflustered, and she does it brilliantly. I mean, and then the flip side of the I really enjoyed it until Twitter became a feature of life. And then you'd see these crazy insults at people, either personal insults to others that were friends of mine, or to myself, which I could care less about. I mean, it was only when they insulted other people that I got a little bit involved. I mean, call me an idiot, that's fair. I don't mind. You paid for your subscription. You can call me what you like.
I think we've both had worse than that, Dennis.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I use the word idiot because other words can't be said on podcasts, but I didn't care. But I found that would actually start to influence somewhat the way you were starting to interact. You start playing a little safer on TV, try not to get these people flustered, which was a mistake because I don't know why I started thinking like that. But with the last 2 or 3 years, my wife wasn't in great health. She is now, thankfully. My daughter had a grandson, and life started to become more important than coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning after a late show and then getting up at 6 to go either fly somewhere or coach at the golf college or whatever. So, John, it just became too much. And then the involvement with Sky didn't just stop. If I go to a tournament and I'm around the range, they'll interview me or have me go into the performance shot centre and talk. So I still feel somewhat involved, but it was a relief. Over 1,000 shows in the studio. It was quite a relief to say that part I enjoyed, but it's no longer part of what I do.
Well, how much? I'm intrigued by there's a very difficult job for somebody that had the role that you had. How far down the road do you go to getting inside the player's head? I mean, how much can you assume? I mean, it's very easy to go too far on that and say something that is completely wrong, I would have thought. I mean, how did you deal with that?
Well, with some empathy for the person that had just made the mistake.
Yeah.
I think it's never a good idea to just outright say that was what a terrible error to make at that time.
Yeah.
This guy's completely useless, and then analyse his golf swing.
Yeah.
Because the fact that he's got himself in a position that when he can make that error at the last few holes, and it is a terrible error, means that probably his swing's not that bad anyway. He's but the way the shows go, the media like to have a hero who was so brave and a villain who was so poor under pressure.
Yeah.
And it's not as simplistic as that. As you know, you've been there and seen these things. I just found it, personally, I found it okay to make a criticism and then not go in too hard. And I'll give you one example that showed I didn't always get it right. Of all people, I criticised Nick Doherty when he was before his time with Dye or Marion Dye or his time at Sky TV, and he was playing somewhere. And just before his tea time, they were showing him on the range, and he was doing some extremely complicated-looking drills. And I did say, this is not the time, in my opinion, for Nick to be doing these drills. And I went it a bit hard, too technical. What I didn't know. He actually confronted me a few weeks later at a tournament. Sorry, it wasn't him. It was his manager who confronted me on his behalf. And what I didn't know until I chatted with Nick and apologised was that the overlay that we got of him practicing was from the Tuesday of the week. And this is Nick on the range, but it wasn't before his round. It was on a Tuesday practice session that they'd filmed. And he had every right to do his intensive practice on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
But I was ill-informed, as you say. I didn't have the information. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I've got to apologise, and I learned a lesson there. You've got to make sure you know what you're saying before you say something that's derogatory. And actually, he'd always been friends with Nick, and after it, he just shook hands and said, "Forget it, pal," and he did. And then we started working together a few years later on Sky. And guy and a good friend.
How much can you give away on this? I mean, how much? I mean, there's obviously differences between broadcasting and journalism, but is there pressure put on? Don't say that. Are there things that places you can't go on television because they're in business with the tour?
You're not told that, but it's a lot different journalism to broadcasting in terms of the broadcasters, rightly or wrongly, and I would make a case that it's probably wrongly, are usually former players, coaches, or associated in some way.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about people that you're either pretty friendly with or you've got a beef with, but you don't want to take it on air. So, if I'd fallen out with you and you're playing on the television, I'm not going to say what a terrible guy you are because we've fallen out. I'm going to be saying, well, here's John Huggan playing the 17th. He's having a good week.
Yeah.
Moving on, like it is. So does it lead to fairly bland commentary? Yes, it does. But as long as it's not cliche, I'm quite comfortable with that because you're there to almost just add some colour to the background. And too much colour comes over the images, and it's all about letting the images do the talk.
Yeah, I mean, I've always argued that it shouldn't be like journalism, but there should be some journalism in the mix, and you touched on it there. I mean, the only criticism I have of Sky really, because I think that they do a great job generally, but they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. They're all ex-players, and they inevitably are all sounding pretty much the same. And I think somebody else, not necessarily the same guy all the time, but to throw a journalist in there now and again to question things maybe slightly a bit more, it wouldn't be a bad thing. I think it would add to the mix and make it a better product.
Yeah, I would see that easily working well in the run up to the show. When you're waiting for come on air at 6, and the broadcaster's not coming on air until 7, you've got that introduction, which people at home don't realise is, okay, do you want us to give you a little taster at 6 till 7, or do you just want to switch your television on at 7 o'clock and you're off and running?
Yeah.
Well, some people do like the chat, and then at that point, a journalist, someone coming in who's not one of the boys, as it were, that would be good. That would add to the debate. All you're trying to do is whet the appetite of what's coming.
Yeah.
And I always felt like saying, look, on Twitter, look, you must know by now that American broadcasters will send the tapes over, the live feed over at 7 o'clock. And you know we're going to be talking about it. If you don't like us talking, don't watch.
Yes.
Don't watch. It's not a big one. But there's plenty of people that do like it. And, sometimes we had rain delays. And I remember one where I had a rain delay chat with Rob Lee and Peter Oosterhuis about the upcoming Masters. And for an hour, we talked about the Masters, and Peter as a player, of course, almost won it one year, and my coaching experiences. And people were loving it, and not everyone. I mean, obviously, you've got people saying, why are these clowns talking? Why can't we have the golf? And you go, well, because there's a rain delay. Oh, they could show last year's Masters. People, not everyone's going to love it, but the discussion in broadcasting is part of the build-up to the event.
Yeah, I mean, I take the view, take the point that I'm not the typical viewer, because I've known most of the guys that are on Sky for a very long time. Rob Lee, you mentioned, and Richard Boxall, I mean, friends of mine for a long, long time, and I know how knowledgeable they are about golf and how funny and entertaining they can be. But it doesn't always come across on the telly because they're being held. It looks to me like they're being held back, and that's a frustration for me, because I think it could be so much better if they were just said, go for it,
Well, they aren't being held back by a rule from above or the directors or anything. It's a natural inclination to try and steer the ship through calm waters rather than go on the rocks.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fair point.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm getting towards the end of this now, Dennis. You'll be pleased to hear, no doubt, but I'm sure you've got other things to do. However, I do want to talk a little bit about your life now. I mean, is semi-retirement a good way of describing it? I know you're still coaching Ross Fisher and Francesco, but what else are you doing with yourself?
Well, I still have the golf college where I coach 22 days a year, and that golf college is with Paul Lyons, who's the owner of it, and a former player himself. And what our plan was from the beginning was to get somewhere where kids could, from the age of kids, they're young men or young women, from the age of sort of 17 to 22, can get some education whilst loving golf. And in the past, that generally a wealthy parent would be a bit indulgent and just let them play and practice at the club for a couple of years. And in the end, they ended up better at snooker and the slot machines than they did and they learned to drink and chat up the barmaid. All great skills for life, no doubt, but not really making them the best they could be as golfers. So we put together this program. It started with about 8 pupils 15 odd years ago, and now there's all in all around 80 odd. And it's not just a college now; it's also a university where you can get a degree. You're playing with like-minded golfers. There's plenty of tuition. There's plenty of golf. There's plenty of hard work at school as well, and it's been an exciting experience. So if you combine that with the bits that I can do with Ross and Francesco in these COVID times still, it's interesting to keep my hand in. But this weekend I walked around a wet field in Upper Bavaria watching my wife play golf. And there's nothing like, you talk about stress and pressure. There's nothing like watching your wife play golf and knowing there's a 2-hour car trip going home. Fortunately, she held a beautiful putt on the 18th green. And we stopped and had a McDonald's to celebrate on the way back. My first in 5 years, may I say. I feel bad for it this morning, though. They're not on their diet. But they're the sort of things where it's just living normal life. I got my daughter's expecting the second grandchild in September. I get to play and practice at the Wisley and do things that I like to do there. And for my sins, I've just joined the board, which means that I get to go to committee meetings. And anyone that's been to any committee meetings will know that after 3 or 4 hours, they're less entertaining than perhaps other things you do in your life. But it's important, their contributions. And I spend so much more time in Munich now. And probably this year I've spent about a month in London and the rest of the time in Munich. And it's a great place to live. It's a great place to be. And you'll be surprised. I even took a 2-hour exam and passed my initial entry to German language, which
based on Deutsch.
Yeah. But the big thing is that most people say I can't even speak English properly. So we've got a big challenge to go into German. This is what I do.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question, Dennis, is that, or one of the reasons, I had interviewed Pete Cowan, a good colleague of yours, obviously, for a long time, on the ranges of the world, and he expressed almost a fear of retirement because coaching is all he does, and he worries, I think, about what is beyond that for him and what he would do with himself. I mean, did that go through your mind, or you sound as if you're pretty well balanced? But was there some concern over, really, what am I going to do with myself?
Zero concern on that. I'm going to write a book with you, aren't I? I'm going to do that.
Hopefully,
that's something we've talked about before. I never found teaching or coaching or golf to be the be all and end all. There was always stuff away from golf that I enjoyed to do. And that being so, it's not so fearful when you take that part out your life and people go, do you miss not being on Sky? Yeah, I miss it, but time's moved on. And different things have happened in my life that have taught me I don't look back well. I don't get a lot of joy looking backwards. I like today, having discovered this, going forward, what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do next? I'm a next day person rather than a look back and ponder, because there's a lot of things that when you look back, you think, I wish that had gone differently. And for me, that's a negativity that I don't really need. And one of the reasons why, and because we're chatting about it, why I stopped doing Twitter. It wasn't the insults and the negativity that were coming to me, because that didn't really worry me. I mean, it wasn't nice, but when it starts to get personal about your friends, and certainly in my case, my wife, and I think you know the story. I think I can tell the story without missing out the swear words. But at Wentworth on the 17th hole at the PJ a couple of years back, a guy with 2 beers in his hand, with 2 mates with 2 beers in their hand. And I only mention that because I would have been doing the same if I had been there, but perhaps I wouldn't have had as many or been so rude. It came up to me and said, I love you on Sky, but I hate what you say on Twitter. Why don't you just, and shall we say, go back to Germany with your German wife, although weren't the and basically go now. And that was probably the final insult. I mean, it's okay getting insulted on Twitter, but when the guy actually does come up and say it to your face, and he's not saying it as a joke, and you realize that, what's the point of doing this stuff? I just walked away from it, and then I just watch it now for the news under an assumed name that we're never going to give out.
But I know who you are.
Yes, I went from 35,000 followers to 29, and that's great, because when people call it followers, that's the wrong word, because of those 30,000, a good proportion are there purely just to tell you how much they hate you. Followers is the worst form.
Dennis, I'm going to ask you one last question, and it's we're speaking the morning after Phil Mickelson won the PGA in America.
Yes.
Extraordinary, clearly, a man of 50, oldest ever. What's your reaction to that? And have you got any explanation for why he and Tiger and others, that this seems to be the year of the geezer? Lee Westwood's done well. Richard Bland's won on the European Tour. I mean, it's the longevity seems to be a thing.
Yeah, my thought wasn't it great entertainment? Let me entertain you. It's a good example of the golf course doesn't have to be fair to be a challenge. There's plenty of people that think it's not fair. And they said it's windy. It was windy, but try playing golf in your neck of the woods on a windy day. It's a different form of wind, isn't it? And Phil doing so well, whatever he does is never surprising. He's just that type of character. I think my overall reflection was I saw that Tiger had texted him and he responded back, and or tweeted him and they responded back to each other. And my thought is that if anything was needed to get Tiger motivated to come back from that horrific injury and do whatever work it takes, and I'm not sure he does need Phil Mickelson's win, but it certainly will be another thing that he will use to get himself fit and strong and healthy and play again. I doubted it, but from what I've seen in the last couple of months since the injury, it seems to be that he's not going to just put his feet up and potter around and do whatever he intends to do each day. I think he'll come back to golf, which is going to be amazing.
Does any or all of what I mentioned, these older guys in inverted commas winning and doing really well, does any of that reflect on the current generation, if you like?
No. I think what reading into it too much would be to say, they're not as motivated or whatever. Yeah. You look at Phil Mickelson, he's really a great golfer and he's kept himself in shape.
Yeah.
He's kept, if you look at him, he's probably one of the fittest looking 50-year-olds. He doesn't look like all the other guys on the Champions Tour.
Yeah.
And plus also he can hit the ball still a long way. And he's a cunning golfer. He knows how to, get that score on the board. And I think, perhaps if there is a criticism I would look at is that the one-dimensional aspect of being a PGA Tour player means that you become very, very good at one type of golf.
Yeah.
Smash and grab golf.
I think there's something to that theory. I thought about that earlier this morning, and that very same thought came to my mind, is that the PGA Tour especially, and increasingly the European Tour, is that the sameness of the challenge.
Yeah,
they become very, very good at that. I mean, goodness knows they may be better than they've ever been. But you take them outside that comfort zone, which generally speaking is the major championships, and suddenly somebody like Phil and Tiger, the older guys, they've got more of a chance because they've been there, done that before.
Well, you think of Padraig Harrington, really,
playing
exactly. So well. But, that's classic Padraig golf. It's messy golf. And messy golf requires people that have grown up with messy golf. And I use that word advisedly. I don't want to say that it's not great golf, but it's chaos, and they've got to cope with chaos. It's not simplistic where you just stand there. One of the criticisms of golf is it's just taking the driving range swing to the golf course and just hitting a succession of shots to a target.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, they're very, very good at it. I mean, never have they been better. But when the challenge gets slightly chaotic and messy, you need players that know how to cope with that. And they then tend to be the older players because they've had experience. But just as easy, someone like Will Salatas can come through and make that comment sound stupid. So golf's a great one for when you talk as much as I do and you do. We can say things that seem sensible at the time and get blown out the water by the complete opposite.
Yeah. But I'm consoled by the fact that it's still more at the very highest level. It's still more than just a test of execution. There's all those random things and luck and all the rest of it that you talked about. That's all still part of the equation. Thank goodness.
Chaos is good. Let's finish with that, shall we?
Okay. Dennis, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much for coming on, and we'll talk soon, I've no doubt.
Thanks, John. Cheers now.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think I'm going back to listen to that episode again because I reckon I missed at least as much insight as I gained. What a great character and generous human being Dennis Pugh is. And if you think you've figured out who his new Twitter persona is, let me know because I'm going to be honest, I've got no idea and I refuse to ask Huggy. Okay, that's all for episode 45, but I hope you've made the effort to follow us in your favourite podcast app because on our next, we find out what it's like to raise a golfer who goes on to become a major champion.
I mean, as of course you get older and you have all these wonderful abilities to tell stories that people can't decide whether they're true or not. Whenever there's debate about how much coaching's changed, I just love to say, look, everyone else that's here that's coached a Masters champion, come and stand next to me.
That's Phil Scott, father of Adam, next time on The Thing About Golf.